Welcome back, everyone. It is noon today in Brussels, and right before your lunch break, we thought it would be great to feed you with a lot of good thoughts about solar sustainability and the circular economy. This is actually a very interesting and hot topic at the moment, looking at EU policy making. So this morning, we already touched upon sustainability in several aspects. We discussed the advantages that it might have to support a solar industrial strategy in Europe. We discussed how sustainability criteria could, for example, help direct even better future investments into clean energy technologies. In general, we see that solar energy is already a very good performer when it comes to CO2 footprint, for example. So together with wind, we are actually the technologies with the lowest CO2 footprint. But at the same time, we do need to pioneer the way towards being even more sustainable, looking at our strengths, our weaknesses, and seeing how we can actually harvest the overall discussion and ambition on having a more circular economy to become even better also within our own industry and more competitive. So luckily for this, we have a wonderful panel of experts, and we are very lucky to have Philippa Nuttall-Jones moderating this session for us. So without further ado, I will give the floor to you, Philippa, and wish all the participants a great session.
Thanks, Aurélie. Yes, welcome everybody to the session. So as Aurélie said, my name is Philippa Nuttall-Jones. I'm Editor-in-Chief of Energy Monitor, which is a new online publication looking inside the global clean energy transition. So I'd like to welcome the panelists to today's session. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're one panelist down, but hopefully she will appear during the session. So Fulvia Raffaelli, Head of Unit from DG Grow at the European Commission, is who we're missing at the moment, but she will hopefully join us. But in the meantime, we have Susanna Wood, who's Marketing Director at Solar Century, Nancy Gillis, CEO of the Green Electronics Council, and we have to be especially gentle with Nancy because she is in America where it is 3 o'clock in the morning, so the questions shouldn't be too hard. And then we have Andreas Vade, who is Director of Global Sustainability at First Solar. I would like to invite you all to open Slido, so if you want to ask any questions, you can do that, and then I will go through the chat and pick up any questions. I think you can all see the slide, but basically you need to go to sli.do and enter the code #SolarPower Summit and submit your questions that way. So without further ado, I'd like to open the floor to Susanna, who will kick us off. Thanks, Susanna.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Susanna Wood and I work for Solar Century. And I'm looking at this topic really from Solar Century's perspective. And we are a developer, we're an integrated developer. So we develop utility scale solar, we then construct it, own and operate it. So that's the kind of lens I've got on this particular topic. And I think one of the things that has become really clear in the last 2 days and every research study that you look at when it comes to the development of solar over the next 10, 20, 30 years is that the growth trajectory is astonishing. And, you know, even with BP describing it as potentially the fastest ever source of energy growth that we will ever see. So with the part of me that is anxious about climate change takes a lot of hope from the success of solar, but I also at the same time have some residual concerns and fears about how this growth is going to pan out, because it's all too easy to envisage a scenario where the standards, the very high standards that we employ at the moment, start to get watered down with this level of growth. Are we going to see less ethical actors entering into the marketplace? Is there going to be undue pressure on commodities, on communities? Is there going to be ethical violations in the supply chain in a bid to hit targets? And how is the land going to be used? Are we going to start deforesting in order to build solar farms? And I mean, I know nothing about the Joshua Tree, but it was interesting to see that news of that reached the media, even in Europe, with solar farms being developed at the cost of Joshua trees in the States. So are we going to cause problems as we endeavor to save the world with solar? So I welcome collaboration by the sector and any kind of leadership that is coming from Solar Power Europe, from the EU Commission. I think we need to be working together in order to address what is a really big topic. And I think the other part of that is that we should be welcoming what's going to come, which is increasing scrutiny from investors. So I recently heard of an excellent presentation from Mark Lewis, who is a real thought leader in this area, and he's Sustainability Director at BNP Paribas Asset Management. They manage, I don't know how many trillions of dollars under management, but they want to get to a point where they can take their entire portfolio and determine how many degrees of warming that represents as a portfolio. To do that, they're going to have to get really mechanistic about what's in that portfolio. And I think that's going to turn back to us, the likes of us, to say, well, what kind of impact are you having by developing solar farms? And I can envisage a scenario where we're packaging up a solar farm for investors. And to date, it's been quite straightforward to say, okay, what's the benefit going to be in terms of CO2 savings? We've been able to do that for years. Here's going to be the yield. This is going to be the CO2 saving. But I think it's been harder for us to determine on the construction side, on the actual manufacture of the solar farm, what the impact is on in CO2 terms. But of course, there are strides being made, and Andreas and Nancy and others are going to tell us about that. From a sort of company perspective, Solar Century is midway through this process, and I would have liked to have shared the results of our own journey to look at carbon footprint specifically. But there are three main tranches in the work that we've been doing. One is to define the scope of our emissions, to measure those emissions, and then to set a target to reduce and remove those emissions. And we seem to be starting more from scratch than I expected us to. So it's taken our consultancy quite a lot of head scratching to determine how to map our business model against the greenhouse gas accounting standards. And in part, that's because of the fact that all of the projects sit in separate SPVs. Those SPVs might get sold at different times, depending on whether we want to build out a project or sell it prior to that. And then when we do actually build it, it's the holding company that builds it. So there's a sort of level of complexity there. But ideally, I would have hoped that we would have had a better starting point for how to define our emissions and how to benchmark what we're doing. And certainly, I would like it to be a part of our approach to be open source about what we find out. And I would like the industry and the sector to definitely be open source on this journey that we're all going on. And so I look forward to sharing our conclusions as they happen. But I think my main message for today would be we need to approach this rapid period of growth with our eyes very much open and welcome that increasing scrutiny that we're already getting, and that we share with each other what we're learning as we go through this process, and that we use it as a starting point for maintaining these really high standards that we've deployed to date. Let's maintain that as we continue on this extraordinary growth journey. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Susanna. There's lots of food for thought there to kick us off. Nancy, do you want to build on what Susanna has said? Thank you.
Yes, I definitely would. And I know that I had a number of slides because, as you mentioned, I'm the CEO of the Green Electronics Council. And some participants in today's session might not be as aware of who the Green Electronics Council is. So I wanted to first give a quick overview and then explain from Savannah's perspective the importance of actually proceeding down the road of making sure that the renewable energy that is coming from the solar sector is actually sustainable all the way down to its hardware. So what I wanted to mention is, from a Green Electronics Council perspective, we are a mission-driven nonprofit. We embrace the benefits of technology, but not at the price of people and planet. Susanna mentioned that there's the excitement that solar has the opportunity to be the fastest growing energy source, and we recognize that. And what we actually do as an organization is not only is there interest by institutional purchasers, which we support, but was mentioned by Susanna, also by investors. And so what we do is we help institutional purchasers and increasingly investors identify credibly sustainable products. And we do that, we give them tools, resources, and we focus on a number of ways to do this. One being, we are part of the Circular Electronics Partnership. I know we're talking today about circularity. So here we are helping move the entire technology sector towards circularity, and I look forward to talking a little bit more about that later. But really what we do is we help build the criteria that credibly define what makes a sustainable, in this case, PV module and inverter, to really help the sector have that baseline that Susanna said about being sustainable. Because we understand that the huge benefits gained by solar being part of renewable energy replacing our dependency on fossil fuels, that what we can't allow, though, is the environmental impact of photovoltaic modules and inverters to eclipse the benefits of renewable energy. And from that perspective, there is a lot of sustainability impact of PV hardware, and there is a lot of value in the materials that one can draw back. But there's also a lot of toxics. And so what the Green Electronics Council has done over the last year and a half is work with an outside standards organization to develop life cycle-based criteria. And these criteria are ones that we are applying against photovoltaic modules and inverters. And we're launching a category. So now when institutional purchasers in the public and private sector, or even those investors want to feel confident that they are investing in renewable energy that's solar and that's based on credible, sustainable technology, that they're able to identify those. And this is important because not only is the photovoltaic panel itself hugely impactful from a GHG perspective, Susanna had already talked about, not only does it have valuable but also toxic substances, it's also, if we don't start focusing on the circularity and the ability to pool these materials back into production streams, it's also that the PV modules can increasingly become a significant part of the e-waste stream that plagues the world globally. And so what the Green Electronics Council is committed to is actually launching under our eco-label, EPEAT, a category next month that applies the life cycle criteria that you see here against photovoltaic modules and inverters so that we can continue to benefit from the potential huge growth of solar, that we actually start replacing that fossil fuel dependency, that it really does help the planet. But while we're doing all that, that we can rest assured that we're not doing it at the price of environmental and social impacts. That renewable energy based on solar is actually good all the way down to the hardware. So that's what the Green Electronics Council is about and what we're interested in. And I'm super excited, even at 3 a.m. in the morning, to be part of this panel.
Thanks, Nancy. That's really interesting. Before we come to the questions, Andreas, perhaps you can explain a little bit more about what you're doing for solar. And I think you've also been doing some work on a carbon footprint, as Susanna mentioned. Andreas, I think you're still muted. We can't hear
you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's excellent.
Okay, so yeah, thanks, Philippa, for the introduction, and also thanks to the organizers for having me here, and indeed a very interesting panel here. And yeah, so if I were to summarize a little bit what we were doing as a module manufacturer, integrated module manufacturer of thin film PV technology, it is indeed, focusing on a life cycle based approach to optimize our sustainability performance, right? That has always been part of the mission of First Solar, to ensure that. And as such, we're obviously welcoming very much establishment of the first international eco-label, Type 1 eco-label in the EPEAT registry. And obviously, you know, being one of the first companies to enlist our product there to make sure that, you know, we really help to set the benchmark in terms of transparency on the performance of the module hardware. And to come back to what Susanna said at the beginning, right? I mean, if you look at, you know, the trajectory the PV industry is on, and you know, the ever accelerating deployment of solar technology around the world, it is tremendously important to ensure that we, as an industry, as the manufacturer of these hardware components, help to address hotspots in the life cycle, right? And those relate, as Nancy rightly lined out, to the modules, to the inverters, and to some extent, obviously, also the balance of system, which goes into these installations. And then, to some extent, also the way we develop and construct these projects, right? Implementing best practices in land management and ensuring that we have a limited, you know, biodiversity impact, or even help to increase biodiversity in managing these assets going forward. So I think that has always been part of the focus here at First Solar, to ensure that these you know, metrics first of all become measurable and comparable, because so far before we had this standard, which is now the basis for EPEAT, there was not really an industry-specific and product group-specific standard. We had a couple of initiatives, mainly voluntarily driven, but it was hard to verify them. And maybe to come back to the point which Jürgen from SMA made earlier this morning, it is important that we have kind of a transparent approach, which is verifiable by the investors, by all value chain partners, and which is in a way also policed by an independent third party like the Green Electronics Council, like the verification bodies, so that we can continue to build trust with the stakeholders which are engaged in the you know, discussions around more deployment of solar PV electricity. And that's obviously one of the aspects we see very or we look at very carefully, and help to promote the standardization around that, so that the environmental and sustainability footprint actually is measurable and is actually also incentivized from the purchaser side. And I think maybe I can conclude my opening statement with that perspective. What we have observed in the market is obviously the most effective way to trigger change in the industry, in the manufacturing industry, the components industry, which is increasingly getting commoditized, as we all know, as we learned in the previous sessions as well, is to create differentiating points in the market space, and, you know, basically motivate manufacturers to embark on that journey by helping them to create a differentiated product which meets unmet customer demand. And that is really what we see at the moment in the C&I space. A lot of customers are looking into a deeper understanding on the sustainability performance of PV modules and inverters they're using in their projects to differentiate. And then also on the regulatory side, I think we see developments which increasingly look into making sure that, you know, the technology we're deploying does not do harm to the environment going forward. And you can, you can look at the, you know, sustainable finance taxonomy, but you can also look at the initiatives of the European Commission at the moment on eco-design and energy labeling, which try to make this more transparent. And I think by setting the standard with EPEAT now, we're introducing this step change in the industry, and hopefully we'll be able to trigger more developments around that over the next couple of years in other world regions as well. Sorry.
That's okay. Did you finish, Andreas? Sorry,
yes.
Your cough was the end. Okay, thanks, Andreas. That was interesting, and brings us in nicely to the work that's happening in Europe on the regulatory side from the European Commission. So I think now that we should have Fulvia Raffaelli, who is on the phone. Unfortunately, she can't get her camera to work, but she's going to fill us in on what work the Commission is doing in this area. Thanks, Fulvia. Can you hear us, Fulvia? Fulvia, if you're there, could you speak and just let us know that you're going to be able to join the session?
Now, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Excellent. Hi, Fulvia. Nice to have you with us. I don't know if you heard the other speakers, but if you could fill us in on perhaps what the work that the Commission is doing in this area, that would be great.
Yes, I would do. And actually, I'm very sorry. The Commission is very defensive with the platforms. So we have a super firewall, and it's been difficult to connect, but here I am. So happy to be part of this panel to update you on the work that we are doing to support actually the sustainability of the solar panel industry, as this is really a very important element to support for the future of the sustainable transition in Europe. I cannot see my slides, so I hope you have it in front of me. Yes, that's it. Okay, very good. So this is an update on the work we're doing for sustainable product policy instruments for the solar photovoltaic modules, inverters, and systems. So it is a very specific action, but it is a quite interesting pioneer one. And you can go to the next slide. Why I'm saying that is a pioneer example. Can you go to the next slide, please? Very good. It is a pioneer experience because when we launched the study in 2017, we decided actually to introduce for the first time an holistic approach and launching not really a classical eco-design study, but a study that would look at all different options available to regulate, but also to support actually the eco-design of those parts. So the study we launched, it is a big study undertaken by the GRC in Sevilla on PV panels, but actually expanding the scope to 4 different policy instruments, so eco-design, energy labeling, GPP, and eco-label. And the study was aimed to assess the feasibility of these 4 policy instruments to the extent of decreasing the environmental impact associated with the PV panels. We made the common support technical analysis at the same time for the 4 policy instruments, which, as I said, is a first in the world of the eco-design. We now towards the end of the study, and the GRC have formulated already some policy proposals, so some policy options that I'm going to present to you. Maybe first a word on the scope of the study, because the study was covering modules, inverters, and systems. And the idea was really to encompassing the all market segments, from residential, commercial, and utility. We explored the entire market, and the policy proposals targeted only some of them, mainly residential. Please go to the next slide. Here you see a summary of the final recommendation. We don't need to go into the details, but I think that it's important. What is important for you to know is that the GRC concluded that the preferred policy approach is a mix of compulsory measure and voluntary. From a compulsory, in relation with the part for regulatory measures, GRC recommend eco-design on PV modules and inverters, and potentially energy labels on installations. In relation with the voluntary measures, the GRC recommends the GPP criteria, definition of green public procurement criteria. The table you have here, you showed in the slide, shows the main areas for policy intervention, ranging from aspects related to the PV performance and yield to circular economy ones. we have really tried to look at all different options and measures to end up with a mix that would make the difference in the future. In relation with environmental footprint, that has been mentioned by the previous speakers as an important element, an important area for on which your industry is investing, we are reflecting on the impact of the LCA as the energy mix of the manufacturing stage, as difficult to, as the energy mix at the manufacturing stage has a limited impact if related to the use phase of the PV panels. So it is important that we take an LCA approach that makes sense, let's say. So that's the element. We haven't yet reached any conclusion on those, but we are reflecting on how to go in this specific area. So what are the next steps? And you can go to the next slide. We are undertaking further technical work on the compulsory policy measures to prepare the eco-design and energy labeling future possible regulatory measures. And we started the work on potential standardization. So the Commission is starting working on formulating a standardization request to the ISO on the environmental impact of solar panels, which emerged as an important element, again, from the GRC study. This will focus in particular on aspects related to the PV performance and yield, on circular economy ones, etc. And we count on your involvement as stakeholders will bring with certain very important elements from the experience that they are gathering on the ground. So this is it's an invitation already, and I'm coming to my last slide to stay tuned, as we're going to plan very soon a first stakeholder meeting to check our founding and to check the ideas of these policy measures and to see with you how to design in the best way, in the most efficient and at the same time ambitious way. This is our contribution to the sustainability of the solar panel industry via the eco-design and energy labeling measures, but also, as I said, potentially looking also to voluntary measures that could complete, let's say, the set of instruments at our disposal. With that, I give the floor back to you, and I hope you were in a position to follow my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fulvia. That's great. Yeah, and we could see the slides and we could hear you very clearly. So that was super. I wanted to ask our three other panelists what you think of what the Commission is proposing, and in particular this mix between voluntary and mandatory standards. And then the second part of the question in terms of standardization. Do we need standardization across the industry? Nancy, perhaps you could come in first and explain how this tallies with the work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you very much. And I found that to be a very interesting presentation. The Green Electronics Council has had the opportunity to engage with JRC on the impacts that our eco-label EPEAT currently cover, which of course those are life cycle. And one of the things that we have found to be very valuable, since EPEAT is a type 1 eco-label, which means that it has its claims third-party validated. It is an eco-label that can be used in many markets. And so to that question of harmonization, if you are able to actually make sure that a set of criteria, such as the ones that were created for this new EP category, are life cycle based, and are looking at, and this is a unique feature of EPEAT, not just at a baseline performance that separates products out for being credibly sustainable from not credibly sustainable, but also includes optional criteria that really pushes for innovation on factors related to sustainability, and it then be in a package of an eco-label that already exists, and where these criteria were created in a voluntary consensus process where you had both industry players, you had purchasers, you had policymakers. We think that this now EPEAT is really a tool, and since it already exists, was created in a way that garnered consensus, allows for both a baseline or almost a regulatory type of approach, plus allows for the growth through optional criteria, and is there to, because it's a type 1, be used in the European market, which is a requirement that all eco-labels there used are type 1. And of course, EPEAT covers other categories and has been experienced and used by public purchasers, that it's really something that we hope is continued to be considered, because we don't want to see duplication of effort or to bring non-harmonized criteria into this market as it's growing so rapidly, because of course then it diffuses the power of the market, right? And then all of a sudden, depending on where manufacturers are going into, they're having to meet a whole different set of criteria. But honestly, as we've learned, when you look at life cycle, frequently the criteria are similar in their impact, but if they're done by different entities and there's not a focus towards harmonization, they're just different enough to where when industry has to prove that their products meet it, it's an inordinate amount of paperwork with no true sustainability gain. So, we are excited about how open JRC has been in learning about the criteria that we've developed and wanting to already seek harmonization. And we hope that that continues to be their perspective moving forward, because we'd hate to see there be undue duplication or non-harmonization in this market.
Thanks, Nancy. Perhaps before I bring Susanna and Andreas in, Fulvia, did you want to reply to anything that Nancy said in terms of the need for harmonization? Fulvia, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Of course, we will look at all different examples already available around, not in Europe, but also around the world. And your experience is a very interesting one. We will certainly consider. The more, of course, we can be in line, the better it is. But of course, we will have to look also at the specificities of the EU regulatory system. But of course, we have your experience very clear in our mind, and I know that you've been already cooperating with the GRC, and we certainly look at your experience as a very important one for the future of designing the measure. Thank you.
Thanks, Fulvia. So Andreas and Susanna, from an industry point of view, how do you see the work that's happening, and what makes your lives easier from an industry point of view? Is it to have harmonization, standardization, and also in terms of voluntary or mandatory measures, is it easier if everybody's being forced to work to a certain standard rather than some people perhaps opting in or people opting out? Andreas, do you want to start? Andreas, you're muted again.
No, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was trying to unmute probably at the same time. So, okay, yeah. So I would say that the situation we have at the moment is well manageable, I think, for the industry, because what Fulvia just introduced are really, is a staged approach, right? So we start with mandatory measures, and I don't have a slide here, but if you think about the sustainability performance of products, and in this case PV modules and inverters, and you look at the bell curve, and you have some worst performing products on the left-hand side, and then some top runners on the right-hand side. What the mandatory measures of the Commission will do now is basically define that baseline and say, okay, you have to meet that threshold to be able to continue to put product on the market. So it's kind of cutting off the worst performers. And I think the Commission has, over the last couple of years, shown that this eco-design framework is one of the most successful policy instruments available in the European Union when you look at other appliances and electronic appliances in the market and increasing the efficiency. So applying that to PV modules and inverters, I think makes a lot of sense to kind of set a baseline. And I think that was echoed by a lot of people earlier this day in the summit from the industry, saying that we really need that kind of differentiation to ensure that the increasing demand is also met with sustainable minimum sustainable criteria. And then the energy label on top of that will enable actually a better informed customer, because the customer will be able, acting as a consumer and prosumer, to understand the performance a little bit better. So I think making that mandatory also makes a lot of sense. And then on the other side, and that's what I want to echo what Nancy has been saying, since we already have a Type 1 eco-label in about 2-3 weeks available for PV modules and inverters, I think from our perspective, it indeed is should be very important that if we are looking into developing criteria which define front runners, that we harmonize the way these criteria are being developed. And I think over the last couple of years, also through Solar Power Europe and the Sustainability Task Force, we've also always tried to help the JRC, but also other stakeholders to take that harmonized perspective, be it through the development of the product environmental footprint category rules, or through the involvement in the preparatory study. And what I see at the moment is a pretty nice alignment of what is being discussed in the criteria discussion on the mandatory instruments with what has already been developed and established in the EPEAT eco-label. So from that perspective, I look very positively at these developments, and I see a potential benefit for the industry in adopting those. And obviously, this also carries an industrial policy dimension, as we all know. It carries an overall social acceptance dimension as well. And so I think these things getting into place in Europe as one of the front-running regions when it comes to sustainability policies and instruments is indeed very, very timely.
Thanks, Andreas. Susanna, Andreas is very positive about everything that's happening. Do you share his positivity, or are there some aspects of this that you're more concerned about?
Not concerned as such. I mean, I think we just look at life from a slightly different lens. We're a developer. We're buying from mainly China and Europe, and we're looking to deploy those products in systems in Latin America, in Africa, and in Europe. So we just want an easy life. That's one thing, we want to make that as simple as possible. So but I think that we're used to a scenario where the EU takes quite a lot of leadership in these sorts of areas, and we're used to working in that sort of environment, and it's actually very helpful that the EU does take leadership stance in this. But of course, the other big stakeholders for us are the banks, and so it would be interesting to see what the banks think about these kinds of. I would have thought they'd welcome it. I'm sure they will, and that I think that will help to define because they have quite a lot of say in the products that we use quite a lot of the time, and therefore it will be interesting to see how they weigh these criteria in their assessment of what we should be using and what we shouldn't be using. And I think there is obviously a big crossover between sustainability and quality. And you'll see the higher ranked products are also better quality, and that does improve the financial model for utility systems over their lifetime. So there's a sort of swell of goodness there, as it were, to support a more sustainable approach that should feed through into the investment model. So we're definitely supportive of it. And I like this idea that there is a minimum requirement and then optional, because I think it allows for innovation and it allows for differentiation from the people who are playing at the higher end of the quality aspect of this, and that has to be good.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Susanna. And I also wanted to ask, you mentioned banks, and obviously we've also been talking about the massively falling cost of solar. Is there a danger that if we introduce too many sorts of sustainability criteria that you could end up with a two-tier market whereby you get the more expensive products that's at the top that are very sustainable, and then you sort of get the less expensive products at the bottom? Or in general, this could actually increase the price of solar and have an impact on the energy transition? I don't know if anybody's got a particular feeling on that, Susanna or Andreas, perhaps.
I think there's, oh, sorry, Nancy, you were going to speak. I was just going to say, I think there is there is already this correlation between sustainability and quality, and that if you're looking at it from purely a sort of financial model perspective, very often it does make sense to go for that quality anyway, because you're going to let's take a very simplistic example. If you've got a warranty of X years, and your life cycle is Y, you want to have the longest warranty possible. That tends to go with quality. So, and then you're having to set aside less for your maintenance budget, and that does affect the overall financial model. So that's sort of there already. I think where we run into problems is when banks in particular are making requests that are just so specific that it kind of narrows you down to maybe one supplier, and that then becomes problematic from a cost perspective.
Nancy, did you want to come in?
I did, because I found your question interesting. It's one that's plagued the technology sector for a long time, and we found it's actually a false dichotomy. And it's interesting when it's introduced, especially in sustainability, because as I mentioned, the Green Electronics Council, we've been in existence for more than a decade, and our purpose has been to actually focus on the sustainability of technology writ large. So we cover a number of technology product areas. And the question invariably from purchasers always comes up, well, if I want the sustainable or the green, I'm going to have to pay more, right? And in the world of sustainability, that is a bit disheartening, because it means that what they're not understanding is that sustainability addresses what are currently externalizations, right? Yes, you may be paying X unit cost, but when you're not buying a sustainable, credible, sustainable iteration of a technology, you're going to pay additional. You're just not paying it at that time. And so what I think we've increasingly, as we see the impacts of climate change, as we see the growth of e-waste as the #1 waste stream, we're starting to globally internalize, especially in institutional purchasing decision-making, and investors and banks who look at those external costs as risks, as a mitigator towards just the initial unit cost. And that when you start looking at this from a life cycle costing perspective, then you're seeing that there is no additional cost. And in fact, as you get more innovative and effective and efficient with these products, the cost actually, from a life cycle perspective, if it follows technology trends that we've seen in laptops and computers and things like that, will be reduced. And it'll be beneficial, the cost, not just for those who are buying, but of course the rest of us who happen to live on the same single planet. So yeah, I actually don't think that there should be at all the expectation of having to pay more when you think about the costing appropriately.
Okay, well that's a bit of good news in an otherwise generally gloomy set of news from everywhere else at the moment. I wanted to come back, Susanna, to what you mentioned in your opening remarks when you suggested that you'd struggled as a company in terms of mapping your carbon footprint, that there wasn't necessarily the information out there that you needed, and then this idea of data sharing and open source materials, and sort of who should be in charge of this process? Is this something that should be managed at a European basis? Is it something that SolarPower Europe should manage? Is it the Commission, or an EU institution, body? How should this be managed, and what would you like to see to help the industry move forward without having to keep reinventing the wheel every time?
Well, obviously, what the EU is doing now is going to help, and the work that SolarPower Europe have been doing with Andreas is going to help as well. I think it doesn't really matter where it comes from, but I think that SolarPower Europe does have the option to play a very helpful role in this. I'm not saying it has to be from there, but that it would be extremely useful. There are some various academic studies that we've bought. I find them quite sort of dense, and they're not particularly friendly. They don't really support in an accessible way what we're trying to do. So I think it's an opportunity for SolarPower Europe to really kind of help out and provide more information, which there seems to be this kind of momentum to do so anyway, with the EU supporting that as well. So.
Great. And we've been quite, sorry, somebody want to come in there?
Here. Can I come in? Just,
of course, yeah.
Sorry for interrupting you. I think that I wanted to come back to this idea that is just expressed about the fact that we shouldn't, let's say, focus too much on the upfront costs. Of course, upfront costs are important, but they need to be seen on a life cycle approach concept and life cycle costing, indeed, assessment. And I very much share these views that we need to contextualize and to see what the role of this technology will be in the whole life cycle, and how much they can also bring. We know that these investments in supporting new technology will be crucial, let's say, in supporting the overall transition towards a green and digital future, let's say. What is also important from our perspective is to keep proportionate, so that we know that the measures we're going to define from a regulatory perspective do respond indeed to the needs and will be contributing to that transition. I'm saying that because we are now experiencing the work on the regulatory work on the batteries. Where we're actually trying to define, indeed, environmental criteria on a life cycle approach for the production of batteries. So let's say a sort of eco-design measures for batteries in the future. And indeed, actually, the complexity of managing this enormous amount of data for regulatory purposes is very high. So that's why I'm saying that it's all very nice and very interesting to go in details and to know everything about the life cycle of those appliances. But I think it's also important that we focus on the right indicators and that we do design the measures around the indicators that can really make the change and can also easily be let's say, communicated and exploited by the different actors across the life cycle of the appliances itself. So that's why I quite agree with the idea that indeed the costs of those or the application has to be seen in an overall context, but also the requirements and the additional measures we're going to define will have to be seen in that context, and we need to remain proportionate, let's say, in the way we're going to define the framework for those appliances. Thank you. Sorry for getting in a bit abrupt.
No problem, because I can't see you. It's more difficult, but thank you for feeding that in. That's really interesting, and it feeds in very nicely that we've had a question from somebody in the audience, which is addressed to Nancy, asking whether you could talk a little bit more about life cycle costing. So perhaps, Nancy, you could explain a little bit more how you see the life cycle costing and to address some of the remarks that Fulvia's just mentioned in terms of need to be proportionate and to have the right indicators rather than trying to perhaps measure everything.
Yeah, no, I will refrain from giving a tutorial on life cycle costing this early in my morning. I think everybody would then conveniently already go to lunch. Suffice it to say, do feel free to reach out to me at the Green Electronics Council, and I'll be more than happy to share with you. My background, of course, has actually been in public procurement. So I do have a lot of information about how to employ life cycle costing of technologies as part of both public and private sector large-scale procurements. But I think what Fulvia had said is very important, and that's where we actually went with EPEAT as well, is you can look at a lot of criteria for this particular technology sector, right, for solar. And we're at the juncture right now to where you don't want to dismiss what is found to be environmentally or socially important, but you've got to focus on the priority factors, the priority impacts, right? And a lot of the life cycle studies have already shown that for photovoltaic modules and inverters. And one of the things that the Green Electronics Council has recognized when you're trying to talk to institutional purchasers, public or private sector, investors or banks, they're looking at a number of other factors outside of just sustainability. So to that point of not only life cycle costing, but quantifying the benefits of buying a credibly sustainable version of a module versus not is something that we've done in other technology areas. So we've built benefits calculators, one that actually looks at the priority impacts from a life cycle perspective of a technology, and then actually equates that with a gain, be it both financial, so all of our benefit calculators actually look at what are the financial benefits of energy efficiency, but then also what are the other gains that you can quantify in environmental terms so that a bank, a city, a country can start talking about their investment in sustainable photovoltaic modules really has had this type of benefit. And so we are launching a benefits calculator technical committee early next year. We're hoping to, of course, engage with JRC, who have been their representatives engaged in some of our other technical committees. It's hugely helpful. But I think that's one of the important things, is the ability to not only point to criteria and say, yes, I'm credibly sustainable from a product perspective, but also, what does it get me? And being able to quantify that. I hope that gets to the question that was asked.
If not, I'm sure that the person will reach out to you. But yeah, I mean, that's great. And I think the idea that there's benefits on all sides is something that's extremely important to bring forward in this debate. I'm aware that we've got about 4 minutes left. And so I wanted to, well, part of the question for the session was what's the biggest challenge in making the solar industry sustainable? And perhaps I could put the question to you all before we finish. We've kind of seen the path that needs to be trodden. There's obviously a lot of good work happening, but what is the biggest challenge now that needs to happen to make sure that the industry becomes more sustainable and can stay that way? Fulvia, do you perhaps want to start in terms of from the Commission's perspective?
Yes, thank you. I think the bigger challenge here is to get the objectives right and to provide really the direction for the investment, for the research of innovation from the industry business plan for the future. We need really to set a clear direction and to mobilize all different tools to achieve that objective. From a connection perspective, of course, the carbon neutrality, it is in 2050 is the bigger objective, but we want to reach that objective with the support, with a full support of our EU economy. So we want to get there with a prosperous, just, and the inclusive economy behind us. So that's the big challenge in front of us, and I think industries like the PV panels, they have invested a lot in sustainability in broad terms, so not only environmental sustainability or energy efficiency, but as said before, in a life cycle approach context, can bring their input there. So big challenge, as I said, maximize the use of all the tools and reinforce the coherence and maximize that efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you, Fulvia. From an industry point of view, Susanna, what for you, for your company, is the biggest challenge in making sure that you're part of this sustainability debate and that you're helping the industry become more sustainable?
So I think I take a lot of confidence that at a product level, there's a lot of work going on that is really going to support us in terms of the key components, be it PV and inverters. Obviously, there's all the other equipment, there's the construction parts to consider, but I feel sort of confident that at a product level, we're largely going to get it covered. So that sort of takes me more down the route of being concerned about our broader impact as a sector, the land that we're going to build on, how we're going to take people with us as we do that, and sort of manage that from a social perspective, and keep our standards high there.
Okay, great. So we need a clear direction. We need to take people with us so that it's not just industry that's moving forward. The public is also on board. Andreas, what's the biggest challenge that you foresee?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Susanna that on the product level, I think we took a lot of great steps and we're there. I mean, you know, just playing that ball back to the and Susanna being on the panel here, I think it's time really on the product level that the developers and power buyers are holding their supply chains accountable. We have the standards now. Transparency is possible. It can be verified. It's policed very well. We have an equal label. So enforcing that through the supply chain, in line with the initiatives we also see in the regulatory level, is, I think, one of the next steps we really should do in the whole value chain, and that will in turn also help to address, you know, land use, social concerns more with more transparency and more standardization. I think that is really something where I feel the commodity manufacturers have to stand together with the developers and the power buyers to say, okay, hey, we know we will run into more and more use conflicts and target conflicts because deployment will increase, the transformation speed will increase. So let's stand together, enforce these standards across the supply chain, and then make sure that we hold ourselves accountable for these impacts and make sure we improve them. So I think that is for me the challenge, to bring the players back to the table and get away from that, hey, the cheaper the better, and you know, I just purchase commodity supply and take that and then deploy that as fast as possible and flip the asset and then I'm out, because that will not work. I think that is important, and that's what I see as the biggest challenge for the next couple of years.
Thanks, Andreas. So yeah, so everybody needs to pull in the same direction to make sure that somebody's not taking the debate in a different way. Nancy, what's the biggest challenge from your point of view?
It's circularity. It's the idea that we've done, and I agree with Susanna and Andreas, that we've moved forward on a product level to really think about sustainability. But when you start thinking about circularity, at its basis, it's an understanding that we're able to take these products, break them back down to material flows of equal value, and bring them back into a production cycle. We're nowhere close to being able to do that. And yet that really is, and why there's why the EU has been a leader in focusing on circularity, is that is how you start stopping the demand for virgin materials. And that is really the only way you're going to reduce the e-waste stream that is just growing tremendously. So I think it's building upon not feeling even comfortable now, not congratulating too much about, oh, we've got, you know, the inroads on sustainable products, but already taking a breath and saying, we have to make that extra step. We have to think about, how do we actually have these products be part of a circular environment? And do we actually even have, from a EU commitment level, the recycling capability and infrastructure to bring those material flows back in?
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so I think just to summarize then, thanks to all our panelists, I think we could have discussed this subject for a lot longer, and I'd have loved to have been able to sort of now pick up on the social challenges and more of the circular economy, but unfortunately we're out of time. But I think the short answer to kind of the question of the session is that on a product side, as you said, the industry is keeping up with its aim to be sustainable. But now, as you say, there are more challenges further down in terms of the circular economy, societal challenges, and how those are managed. Thank you very much to everybody. Aurélie, I think, was going to pop back in to give people instructions about what's happening later, but she seems to have popped in and disappeared. So I will close the session there, and thank you all for your participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aurélie is there.
Thank you, Philippa. No worries. We're trying to keep track with the timing, but I think, I mean, you said it all. It was a great session, really, and thank you a lot for these insights. I think it's wonderful to see as well. I mean, I'm always happy when we're able to tackle the myth that actually the solar sector is not doing its job in this regard. I think it's very important to recall that our sector is very much proactive when it comes to the issue of sustainability, that we are doing good, but of course we have some work to do, like everyone. And I think it's also, from our perspective, a great opportunity to build a new industry also in Europe, because we do see a lot of jobs coming along, notably with the recycling industry. So thanks a lot, and thank you to our participants. I think our panelists and our audience have deserved their lunch break, or at least for you, Nancy, maybe a little breakfast. But thanks a lot. It was super interesting, and we'll reconvene together at 2 p.m. sharp to discuss another very nice and innovative business model, AgriPV. Thanks a lot, and bon appétit.